You're listening to Always Player One, a solo board gaming podcast.
Hello and welcome to Always Player One. I'm Scruffy Gamer.
And I'm Norm. Okay, so guys, today is our second episode, and what we're talking about today is the solo deck building game Friday. And we found it fitting, as we're talking about the game Friday, to also talk about the subject of difficulty in solo games. Scruffy, what else have we got coming up?
So after we've talked about that, we'll be taking your feedback from last episode and your responses to our questions. And we'll be asking a new question this week, and we'll read out your answers in the next episode.
Perfect, yeah. So once we're done with the main topic, we'll continue the conversation with you guys, the listener. So if I can start by talking about Friday very quickly. If you haven't played Friday before, it's a solo-only deck building game. It's designed by Friedemann Friese and it was published in 2011. You're looking at about a 25 to 45 minute playtime. It really takes up very minimal time and table space. It's quite a small game. In the game, what players do is they take on the role as Friday and they attempt to help Robinson Crusoe survive on a desert island. In the game, what you'll do is you'll cycle through a deck of hazard cards. Each time a cycle is completed, the hazards increase in difficulty. Players will then play cards from their own deck in an attempt to overcome the hazards. If they are successful, the hazard cards are added to your deck and they improve your deck. If you fail, you do lose life, but for every life you lose, you'll be able to trash cards from your play area, so hopefully that helps you out a bit as well. If you do make it through the hazard deck 3 times, you battle pirates, which kind of act as, if this was a video game, these guys would be like the final boss. And if you beat the pirates, you win. If you ever run out of life, you lose. Does that sound about right?
You nailed it, absolutely. You know, when I did the playthrough, I thought that you were playing as Robinson Crusoe, so it's news to me that you're playing as Friday. Isn't he the imaginary friend?
He is the imaginary friend, yes. I looked it up on the Geek, and I think the description says that you as a player are Friday, and you're trying to guide Robinson through the desert islands. That's a bit of an abstraction there, or a bit meta there, as you as a player are actually Friday. So yeah, I thought you were Robinson as well, but blow me down.
Well, that's amazing because a lot of the cards are things like distracted or just the sort of thoughts that come to Robinson, I guess. So this you've pulled up the focused card, I've pulled up the genius card, the strategy card, pulled up the distracted card, pulled up the stupid card, the suicidal card, and I guess those are the kind of the thoughts that Robinson's having in the disastrous situation that he's found himself in. And I guess it makes sense that you're Friday, you're the person giving him those crazy or sometimes hopefully more helpful than crazy thoughts.
Doesn't feel like it.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, the reason we've chosen to do Friday with this topic is because it feels like a lot of the feedback we've seen on it from different people is people are often saying it's a really, really hard game, and it seems like some people think it's impossible, you know? Um,
Others after a number of plays also find it too easy. So it's an interesting one for this subject. Yeah, but obviously, like Scruffy said, he's obviously done a playthrough which is available on his YouTube. Links in the description. But how did that go? First of all, no spoilers, but how did it go?
Well, I don't mind giving spoilers here, but just before I dive into that, I just want to say you said that some people find it a lot easier after multiple playthroughs. I think I might be the opposite because I was kind of in the camp, and going into this episode, one of the reasons we chose this topic is because I thought that I was one of the people thinking Friday's too easy. You can't lose it. You know, once you get a basic sort of formula, even on the hardest difficulty, I couldn't imagine how you could possibly lose it. And I stand corrected.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Yeah, so when I settled down to film the first thing, I was doing a playthrough. It was all going, you know, standard, fine, no problem, no sweat. And I got to the last hazard, the last turn on the third phase, and I lost. And I was like, wow, okay, maybe this is hard. I had a quick look at the rules and realized I was making things a bit tricky for myself. I wasn't playing the rules quite right. Um, got a few things wrong. And so I settled down to do it again, and that's the video that I've uploaded to YouTube. But oh my god, it's a lot harder than I thought it was.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I don't know what's different. Maybe I got really lucky the times I've played before, but you know, I've got to say it made it more fun. That it wasn't really easy. It wasn't a piece of cake. I thought Friday wasn't for me, but now I'm kind of like maybe there's something to this game. You know, it made me want to play it even more, just to uncover all its secrets. You know.
This is news to me. See, I thought we'd be coming into this episode with like a good cop, bad cop. I'd be going, guys, don't worry. It's a difficult game. Like it's fine that you're dying in the game a lot,
Well, that's what I
and
thought too. I
and
thought
that
I was,
and that you would be, oh, no, it's not a difficult game. You guys
yeah,
should play
I thought I
better.
was going to be a real heel and just be like, you know, "Ah, you guys suck. I'm amazing. This game's easy." But if you watch the playthrough, you'll see. Yeah, I get I get pushed up against the wire quite a lot. It was not an easy run. I'm not going to say whether I succeed in the end or not, but oh my god, Friday's a hard game.
Brilliant. So,
I was intending to play on the hardest difficulty, but I forgot to put an aging card in my deck. You know, when you meant to draw one of the aging cards into your deck, so I was kind of playing on almost hardest difficulty. I messed up the setup. I got it right the first time around, messed it up the second time around. Never mind. Um, but yeah, even without that extra aging card in the deck, phew, it was a really hard game. It didn't need it.
so for context, how many times do you think you've played Friday?
God, I really don't know. I think I would say not too many. Maybe just around 9 or 10 times, probably. I mean, I did it. I went through each of the different difficulties. There's 4 different difficulties on there, and I played the very hard difficulty a few times, and then I obviously did 2 playthroughs for this podcast. So yeah, I'd say around about that. I guess I just got really lucky in the times where I did the very hard mode in the past. You know, I mean, I remember ages ago I made a video of it for you to show you that you can do it because you were coming to me saying it was impossible.
Yeah, yeah. I know, and in that video, you absolutely nailed it.
Yeah,
And I learnt a lot. I actually won my first game of Friday immediately after watching that video. I felt inspired. So,
yeah.
and
For listeners, I've taught Norm everything he knows about board games. That's canon. I mean,
um, we'll edit that out. Yeah.
absolutely not. I'm in charge of the editing. That stays.
Oh, goody. Um, so, what kind of things do you like or dislike? How do you feel about Friday in general?
So, I think one of my favorite things is the way the aging cards work, and that you are trying every cycle of your deck. You are trying to get rid of the aging cards. They are horrible. If you pull up an aging card against a hazard, it's a spanner in the works. And there are a few cards that let you kind of cheese it a little bit because normally the only way to remove cards, like you said before, is if you lose life, you can trash cards. You know, and aging cards cost 2 life to trash, which is expensive. And not only are you losing that life, but you're not adding the hazard to your deck, which means you're not getting a nice card. So you're having to lose to make progress in that sense. Because I can't imagine how you could possibly win at the game if you do try and just keep all the aging cards in your deck. But luckily, there are a few cards that have the destroy ability, and that's pretty powerful because the way that works is when you play those cards, you can use that ability to just turn one card face down. It counts as a 0 for the hazard you're on, which isn't great, but it then removes it from your deck. So you can succeed at the hazard and remove cards. I feel like they're the way to go, really. Like they're the only thing that dragged me through was getting a few lucky draws of them with the aging cards. You know.
Yeah, and the agent cards I think are a really nice piece of design because one of the things you can do on Friday is you can very quickly, because you have so many opportunities to thin your deck, you can very quickly get very efficient deck. But if you have a very efficient deck which is low in cards but they're all good, every time you cycle through your deck, you have to add an aging card in. So your deck is never completed. You never finish constructing your deck because it's never perfect.
Mm.
Things are always getting added in. I think that's a really nice thing for players to try and overcome. Sometimes I don't know about yourself, Scruffy, but sometimes when you get an aging card, you sort of think, well, I know I'm not going to win this interaction, so I really hope I get my aging card. I
Oh
want
yeah,
to get it
absolutely.
now.
Especially early on when you're really wanting to thin your deck out. I had times where I drew a card and was like, brilliant. So I win the interaction. That sucks. I really wanted to lose this one, you know? That whole thing you were saying about cycling a deck, it feels really quite killer. Like you feel like you're doing the right thing by getting rid of all your because your deck starts rubbish. It starts with like four good cards in it, and the rest are just bad or terrible.
Abysmal cards.
Yeah, and so you want to get rid of them, but when you do, you look at your deck and you go, "Wow, I'm going to be cycling through this in another one or two hazards." So I'm going to get another aging card, and then I'll have to deal with that, and it's very
And
tense.
some of those agent cards are really, really nasty. So sometimes you think, yes, I've built a really good deck. And then one or two hazards later, you go, well, this is actually a pretty dangerous and swingy deck now because I've got one or two agent cards in there that are really going
Oh
to.
yeah, if you let one get through a whole cycle, and you just go, "Well, I can't get rid of that aging card. I'm going to have to put it in my discard and draw it later." I mean, you're in trouble. You're like, wow, this is going to really mess me up, and it does, and very quickly. The turnaround is very very fast, and then you've got another aging card from the cycle as well to worry about. It's pretty scary, and the only way to combat that is by adding more cards to your deck by succeeding at the hazards. But you've got to hope they're good cards, like a few destroys or um, other cards that can manipulate. The abilities on the cards I really like. Actually, they're very good. The way they allow you to manipulate the game and stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting when you play your cards from your hand, then or in your play area. The actual abilities are not super. They don't feel super powerful. You don't feel like you're making that many decisions when you're playing your cards. But
Mm,
actually, the timing, the order of which you select or the order in which you pull out the triggers. You know, your plus one life. You can continue drawing cards.
mm,
If you have plus one life because you can pay a life to keep drawing cards, so they double up as like a draw a card essentially. So it doesn't immediately appear that there are a lot of decisions there when you're playing your cards, but actually there kind of is, and it's subtle, and it's not something you pick up on your first play. But after repeated plays, like you were saying, Scruffy, you do tend to go, "Oh yeah, well actually this ability is really good," or "This ability, I don't want to use it yet until I see the next card I draw." For example, like when you use your double, for example.
mm.
Um, it's really interesting. I'm glad you spoke about it because
Well, I mean, card draw could be nice because each hazard has a number of free cards you draw, and then like you say, you're paying life to keep drawing more cards. But there are cards that let you draw cards, or you can gain life. But the only problem is, the more cards you draw to take on a hazard, the quicker you cycle through your deck, and then you bring in more of those aging cards. So taking on the big hazards gets you nice rewards, nice cards, but it does mean that you're going through your deck faster. It's a really interesting push axis of like. Do I go for the easy one just because I don't want to use many cards in my deck and get aging cards, or do I want to go for the hard one? And I guess it's about striking a balance there. Um, I don't think you could do all of one or all of the other for one game. You couldn't say, well, I'm only going to take on the hardest challenges for this game, or I'm only going to take on the easy challenges for this game, because I think you need to do a bit of both, and I think that's a really lovely design choice there.
yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. The game is all about push and pull. When you trash your cards, you're losing life. When you thin your deck, you're making it more likely that you're going to get aging cards. There's always a push and pull. Whenever you get better at something, you have to pay for it somewhere else. And it might not be immediate on your first play, but very quickly you will learn that nothing is simple. you know,
Yeah.
there's
Well,
little
I mean,
strategies in every.
I didn't realize until, like I say, these last two plays that the game is difficult. Like I don't know how it happened in the past. Maybe I've forgotten something that I did before, or maybe I don't know, maybe I was playing with the rules wrong or something in the past, but yeah, it's a very difficult game. Like it's really unforgiving. Suddenly you'll just have an encounter and go, but this is impossible. There's no way I can get 8 points in 3 cards. That's impossible. I'm gonna have to spend life, and I've got 3 life left. Where's all my life gone? And yeah, it gets hard.
Moving on from the difficulty and the cards, I think one of my favorite things about the game is it has quite a linear narrative, but it has a really solid narrative structure in
Mm,
the way. So, like I said in my description of the game, you cycle through this deck of hazards 3 times. If you're successful, you face the pirates. It's really nice because every time you cycle, you increase the difficulty. So the game is very much, you build up, you get temporary mastery of your deck, and then things get harder and the stakes are risen. And then you adjust, and then the stakes rise again. And then finally, when you're finished constructing your deck, you then get to use almost your entire deck against the pirates on the final boss. And I think it's a lovely narrative where you build and things get harder and you build and you overcome. And then finally, in this big flurry of cards across your table, you get a really big boss battle at the end. And I think that's a lovely, like I said earlier, it's almost like a video game where you go through the levels and then you fight the big boss, and hopefully you come out victorious.
yeah, I mean,
But
that use of difficulty to determine pacing is absolutely spot on with the game. You're totally right, Norm. Yeah, it's exactly what you say. It's like a story. You start off on a fairly easy, sort of setting the scene, establishing, finding your feet, and then you move on to things getting a bit hard. And I think in the yellow phase, things are kind of manageable. You can get through most encounters without losing life if you've got a really strong deck. It's a challenge, but it's not too hard. And then the red phase, you're going to be losing life on most encounters.
and I think, correct me if you disagree, feel free. Um, but I think if you do succeed in the red phase, if you have a deck good enough to do that, you're almost definitely going to succeed against the pirates.
Mm.
And that's only one of the things that I really like the final fight with the pirates. It does feel tense. After playing it a number of times, I feel like if I'm doing well in the red phase, I already know that I've won. I don't know what you think about that at all. If you,
I'm not so sure. I mean, it depends how well you're doing in the red phase, because to be honest, I felt like in the red phase, both the last games I played, it was just about surviving. It's like I've just got to live this red phase. I'm just going to take that, explore the raft, because that's less cards and less life. It's going to make me lose.
hmm.
But I guess if you're absolutely breezing through the red phase and doing each one, yeah, you're going to be feeling very comfortable, aren't you? But it will only take a couple of bad aging cards for you to lose a lot of life on the final pirate.
And the aging cards do get worse towards the end of the game as well.
Mm.
Um, so that is something that does make it a little bit more swingy. So I guess maybe, yeah, I guess maybe you're
Oh,
right.
that's something we didn't point out as well. There's a kind of an enrage timer on the game where, by that I mean, if you take too long and you cycle through your decks too many times, you'll start hitting. There are 3 really nasty aging cards, and if you pull up one of them against a hazard, you're almost definitely going to lose that hazard, or a lot of life trying to mitigate it. It feels like they are kind of game over mechanics.
Yeah.
I don't know what happens when you've used all of those. I don't think I've ever got there. Maybe that means
I've never. It's never even occurred to me to check because I've not got to that position before. But I'd be interested to know. Maybe I'll look it up
yeah,
after the episode. But yeah, I guess maybe it would be a timer. Maybe the game would end, or I'm not sure. Actually, I don't know.
yeah. But it adds a real sense of urgency to the game, and kind of frames it all in this thing of, okay, I need to not you know cycle through my deck too many times. I need to just, because the way the game works is you can just keep drawing cards if you keep paying life, right? Until you succeed at the hazard. And so the temptation might be to keep doing that, but then you go, oh, but if I do draw a card here and it will take maybe 2 or 3 cards, I'm going through my deck quicker. And if you do it too much, you'll end up pulling up those horrible aging cards. So it kind of makes you kind of face the moment of being, well, maybe I'll just take this loss and stop here, and lose the life and trash these cards I'm not that keen on having in my deck, and move on. So it keeps things flowing and ticking really nicely.
It goes back again to it being a push and pull. Everything you do in this game has some kind of counter. If you're doing something that works out well for you, there is some negative counter somewhere else.
Yeah.
If you're doing something that's working out bad, you are normally given the opportunity to capitalize, like thin your deck when you lose life. It's all about the push and pull, as we keep saying. But yeah, that's really interesting. But
I think it's
yeah,
probably the best example of a game that uses its loss conditions, and it's every time you get something bad happen, it feels constructive. It feels like you're still making progress. It's very rare
well,
that,
you learn something every time.
yeah, but I mean, mechanically in the game, I mean, the very basic one of, if you lose a hazard, you're thinning your deck, and that's fine. That's just as much progress sometimes as winning at a hazard. So every battle, um, it feels interesting whether you lose or win. There are just situations that are really terrible, like if you lose but there's no card you want to remove from your deck, then you've lost, and you're in a
Yeah.
position there where you're like, no, I need to draw another card. I need to make progress somehow, otherwise I'm not happy.
And as hard a game as it is to win and to get good at, it's a very easy game to learn. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I think especially if you play it on the not the hardest difficulty, it can feel quite relaxing. I mean, I think if it ever does feel too easy, then you should definitely up the difficulty, definitely, and give it another go. Yeah, because I didn't enjoy the game until I was finding it really hard in these last few games. And I think that's really interesting. How do you feel, just opening this up a bit more broadly, how do you feel, Norm, about games that let you set your own difficulty like that?
Variable difficulty is one of my favorite things in solo games because, well, if we're talking about difficulty in a broader sense, variable difficulty is something that I really love
Mm.
for the reason that difficulty affects replayability. If something is too hard that I can't win, I'm gonna find myself reluctant to pick it up and fail. I don't want to spend 10 minutes setting up a game that I already know I'm going to lose before I begin. Um, that being said, if something is too easy and I begin to find it trivial, then it's also going to have a hard time getting off my shelf and getting to the table because I don't want to know the outcome before I begin. And that's games need a level of uncertainty. And one of those areas of uncertainty with games like Friday, games where you don't have a beat your own score mechanic, games that give you a victory condition, I think variable difficulty is really important. I also I also have the opinion that I know I'm really bad at setting things easy for myself. I'm really bad at giving myself an easy time. I see people in playing Mage Knight and saying, "Oh, I set the city levels at 3 and 5 because I'm still learning," and I think I would never do that. And I think good for them. That's awesome that they can do that and just go, you know what, I'm learning the game, no pressure on me. But I can't, for some reason. I have a real hang up on it. If I have to tone the game down for me to do well, I really have a hard time letting myself do that. I don't know if that's something
I'm I'm
you've done.
I'm absolutely the same. I mean, the thing is, though, I always prefer a game to be too hard than too easy. If a game's too easy, I feel bored. If a game's too hard, I sometimes feel angry or frustrated, and usually I'll blame the mechanics of the game and say that it's broken or unbalanced or whatever to make myself feel better. But
Naturally.
then I'll go back to it and get good, and want to work on it and win eventually. Um, I'm wondering what you'd say would be the alternative to varying difficulty. And you did mention score there. Would you say that's kind of an alternative to varying difficulty if you just have to keep trying to beat your own score, which inevitably will make it more difficult? because you're trying to get a higher score every time, and every time you play, you're trying to get a higher and higher score.
Yeah, and that yeah, absolutely, because the difficulty doesn't matter then. It's just you against yourself. And I think the reason that difficulty in games is interesting topic for a solo board gaming podcast is because when you play multiplayer, the difficulty is set by the opponents you're playing against. The game, if it's easy to win, it's might be because your opponents didn't play very well.
Yeah,
Whereas if you're playing solo, the inherent difficulty of the game is a much more it's much more in the spotlight, than it is multiplayer. It's if you win and it was too easy, then to the game needs to have something to adjust for your skill level. And if it doesn't, then maybe that's a problem with the game. So I think that's why it's such an interesting topic for solo games as opposed to multiplayer games.
that makes a lot of sense. I think you're totally right, Noel. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Just going back to Friday for a second. One other thing I really like about Friday, and I was hoping to bring up, is the way that you interact with the game. So when we say you cycle through a deck of hazard cards, we don't mean you do each one every time. You pull up two and you choose one. And I think that's really nice because, like you said, Scruffy, when you get into the red fades and you are just holding on, you can purposefully just pick the easier fight. And it's very friendly to newer players or new players in general, whether you're new to Friday or whether you're new to board games in general. It feels very familiar. It almost feels like an app. Click this one or this one, select this card or that card. Um, and then when you do select your hazard, because you just turn over a number of cards. If you haven't got what you need, you can stick or twist. These are really common concepts for people who play games or who don't play games. I think that's one of the reasons why it's so popular as a solo game because it has really familiar concepts to for new players. And some other popular solo games might not be as easy to learn. But I don't know. Is that something you've sort of considered or enjoyed about the game
Yeah,
before,
the
Scruffy?
level of agency for the player is brilliant, and your choices are always like you say, a stick or twist. Just do you want to carry on? Do you want to stop? Do you want to? That's always what it's asking you. Like, okay, it's always an option of two things, isn't it? Do you do
Yep.
this hazard or this hazard? Okay, now do you draw a card? Of course, you draw one card. Okay, now do you draw another card? Then once you're finished, okay, brilliant. So you lose. Which card would you like to lose out of these cards? It's very. It feels like the choices are always very simple. And I said while I was playing, it always ends up feeling like it's playing itself, but you are the one in
Yeah.
charge. You are in the driving seat, so it will give you bits of information, and then you just go, oh, okay, well, I'll pick that one.
The description I would use is simple but impactful decisions.
The pace is really quick. The tempo is really quick. It feels so. It's not like one of those games where you go in and you're sat and you're thinking and you're putting your hand in your head going, how do I get from here to here, or how do I get the resources I need and get and min max this perfectly. It feels very light, even though it's very difficult.
Absolutely, and it does that so well. It walks that tightrope extremely well. It's very approachable to learn and to play. Very difficult to win, um, but I do know that there is a camp that, like you said, once they've got the hang of it, they feel like they've got the hang of it. I don't know if you listen to the One Stop Co-op Shop podcast or their YouTube channel, but they put Friday in their top 20 solo games. But they said what you might not like is once you get the hang of the game, you feel like you can beat it even on its most difficult setting. But I think you have to play it a lot in order to get
I think that is something that I didn't realize that every game of Friday, in some way, because of the way the randomness happens, you it's not always going to work. I mean, maybe I haven't got the strategy pinned just right, and maybe I'm missing something quite important. But I think I played exactly the same as I did when I breezed through it on the hardest difficulty. I think the difference is the way the cards came out gave me different options, and sometimes the cards just fall in such a way that you don't have the best luck, and you end up losing a bunch of life in one encounter, and it happens again, and it sort of snowballs. I mean, I pulled up an aging card that I had. There are things that you have no control over. What aging card comes into your deck, you have no idea. And when you draw it, you don't know when you're going to draw it. And when that happens, it takes the control out of your hands. And even if you have the best strategy in the world, I think you can still definitely lose on hardest difficulty just because of a bit of bad luck, which doesn't feel like a bad design choice. I think it's nice, especially for solo games. I think they can really get away with a bit of chaos messing you up, even if you played a perfect game to some extent. I think it can be nice to know that you can still lose. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. Actually, I think yeah, if you don't want it to be solved. We spoke about this a little bit with Feast Odin and the randomness in that game. The randomness in this is much more forefront. It's much more abrasive with you as a player. It goes, no, you may not. You may not win this card. You may not succeed in this encounter. It's much more forefront, and you have to be okay with that. And if you're not okay with that, it probably isn't game for you. But then again, maybe if you're not okay with that, you might even still think it's okay because it's such a short playtime. If you crash and burn in the yellow phase, this is a 25-minute game, maybe less, you know?
Yeah.
And you might be completely fine with it, and you can very easily just shuffle the cards back up, deal them out, and go again.
To some extent, I don't know if solo gaming is for you if you can't be okay with the idea that you can play really well and still lose the game. Because I think solo games inherently, like you say, in multiplayer, it's good to have a game where the best player wins. The player who plays the best gets the highest score and wins. But I think in solo games, it's kind of different because it needs to have the element of chance to lose, the element that you might not succeed. And whether that's that you might not succeed because you might not get as good a score as you normally get, or whether you might not succeed because the scenario has a loss condition, like a Robinson Crusoe or Friday, where you might run out of life, or your structure gets destroyed. Whatever. I think it needs to be possible to lose. Otherwise, there's no conflict, there's no challenge. You might as well. I don't know. If there's not the chance to lose, then where's the fun? You know?
Yeah, game needs, like I said earlier, game needs a level of uncertainty. Um, and I'm assuming that a couple of caveats in what you were saying now. I'm assuming that you're talking about games like Friday where they give you a winning and
No,
losing
no. I mean,
condition.
like I was saying, I think that in a game, for example, like Mage Knight, where it can be, you can go in knowing I know how to play this. I know how to win at this. I've set the difficulty level such that I expect to win at this. But still, you've set your own condition of like, well, I want to beat my last high score. That needs to be possible, that you can't beat your
Okay,
high score, and not because you played badly necessarily, but just because of bad luck. I drew the wrong cards. I didn't quite get the right enemies at the right time.
but even in Mage Knight, there's a win and a lose condition. Let's say you're doing a conquest scenario, you need to conquer both cities. In again, in like when we covered Feast Road in our last
Mm.
episode, you could just play through the game, get a terrible score, and then pack away, and it doesn't matter. There's no win or lose condition, except for it tells you to aim for a certain amount of points, which I don't remember. That was 2 weeks ago we talked about that. Jeez, but it tells you to aim for a certain score. But if you get it or you don't, it's not really it's not a true winning condition in the way that Friday is, where you either succeed in glorious battle with the pirates or you crash and burn and you run out of life. And I think in these games, it's a lot more important that yeah, you can get the game can do something unexpected, and you have to be okay with that. I agree, but I think it's even more important in games like Friday or Mage Knight or many of the other solo games, Robinson Crusoe, where you have um, a win condition. You have to do this to win. I don't know if if you agree with that. But I think it's even more important in that case.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of what the alternative. You said that Feast for Odin's a good alternative where it doesn't have a loss condition, but you do still need, like we said in the last episode, you need that level of randomness and chance or some sort of something external to your decisions that you don't have agency over that can affect your game.
Okay, I've got an interesting one for you. Um, so I know it's not your favorite game in the world, but
Hmm.
Um, Caverna has no randomness at all. It tells
Yeah, it
you
does.
in solo games, in the solo mode, it tells you what actions to lay out and when they're revealed.
Oh, okay.
It also doesn't let, because on the action spaces they accumulate resources when they're not chosen, it doesn't let any action space accumulate more than six. So Caverna is, you can plan from turn one to turn whatever when the game ends, and it has a certain number of turns, so it always ends at the same time as well. There is zero
That's
randomness.
interesting.
There is also zero uncertainty, except for and it, so I read a very interesting book called Uncertainty in Games, which you guys should absolutely check out if you're at all interested in this sort of subject. I could speak about it all day. And they say there are seven types of uncertainty in games, and that uncertainty in gaming is essential. And for a game like Caverna in solo mode, where there is appears to be no uncertainty, they call it analytical uncertainty, where there's actually no real uncertainty, but the level of planning involved and the level of branching decisions. Well, once you take one action, that then gives you this resource, which then opens up these decisions. The level of branching decisions is so difficult to map out that actually it's still uncertain enough to be interesting. And I don't know
Oh,
what
so
you
the
think.
obscurity caused by not being able to sit down and work out every move makes it
Yeah,
uncertain. That's really interesting. So, because the choices are so obscure that you can't work out the best option by sitting down and working out because it would just take too long. And so you have to work based on instinct and interaction with the board game and what you did previously, and then work on improving that next time or is a game, and that adds to the uncertainty. I've never considered analytical uncertainty. That's a very interesting concept. I like it.
but here's the counter. Someone on Board Game Geek has planned out what they did to. So the score that the solo mode asks you to get is 100, and he managed to get over 200, and he puts down what he does on every single turn. And I read that, and I've not played Caverna since I read it.
Because unless you
Because
can beat that, then where's the game? You know.
yeah, so now in fact, even when I play multiplayer, I can't. I still try and do the first four turns in that script that he's put out, because it's just I can't get that out of my brain. I know this is the optimal move. Why would I not do it?
It's kind of like if you were
So
to try and take on something like speed running and you know the mechanics, but there's no skill bar. You just need to know how to do it, and then brilliant, you did it. You know.
so that is the thing. So analytical uncertainty is an interesting
Yeah.
concept, but there is always someone who's willing to do the legwork.
What's to say
And
that? I mean, they might be wrong. There might be somebody that comes along. It's a very different game, isn't it? Playing it like that, trying to work out the most optimum moves.
yeah, I can't even remember if it was 200 or 300 that they scored. 300 seems really high, but it was a long time ago because I used to play a bunch of Caverna solo. But like I said, that's kind of put the dampeners on that one for me. Um, but yeah, that's one thing where I think it's more difficulty in games is more important when you have a winning condition than it is when you're trying to achieve a high score, because it feels more dramatic. It feels more, oh, I just won. I just made it out alive. You know, the score, if you have to count the score afterwards, is almost not not important, in my opinion.
Okay, so final thoughts on difficulty in games. Do you prefer games to be too easy or too hard?
Too hard.
Yeah, too hard.
Okay, so final thoughts on Friday. Would you recommend it as a Well, it's only a solo game. Would you
Yeah,
recommend
it's great
Friday?
fun. I would definitely recommend maybe starting off. It depends on your skill level. If you want to give yourself a bit of a challenge right from the start, then go for one of the harder difficulties. But I think the very hard difficulty, expect to lose if you've not played before. It's very hard.
Yeah, and it's a very low price point as well. So if you're curious, just you know, I think I paid £11 for mine. Which if you're
Okay, so I think it is time to talk about the answers from last episode's questions. Have you got them there?
I do
Let
have
me
them here. So
say right
first of
now,
all,
I haven't heard a lot of these. Certainly haven't heard all of them in full. So what we're going to do in this section is Norm has been in charge of the correspondence, and he's going to read out an edited version of the responses, and we'll see what he says. So the question from last episode was.
what are your favorite solo games? How do you get into solo gaming? Well, was the question from last episode. Um, because that's exactly what we were talking about. Um, but yeah, first of all, we're really surprised at the response we got. So many positive responses and people writing in. So thank you very much for that, and we hope to keep that going. But certainly been part of the show that I was really excited about. So thank you. I'm not going to name people, give first and surname. I wouldn't like to do that. So I'm just going to first name you all. Hope that's fine with you. Um, so first of all, we had a chap called Eric write in on our Instagram. He was just picked up Feast Rodin, so he said he specifically got it for solo gaming whilst in quarantine, which I think links into what we were talking about in last episode. I said I actually said about how I think people are going to be playing in quarantine solo a lot more. I think we're going to get a lot more solo gaming, so I think that links in.
What a good pickup. Just want to say that right off the bat. Great choice.
And he goes on to say that although it's heavier than what his partner usually likes, she might go ahead and give it a try. And when I read that, I actually reminded me of what you said about how it appears complex, but actually narrows the choices down for you, and it's actually very easy to pick up. It's like a simple game wrapped up in in a complex cloak. Um, so
Yeah,
that's
I
quite
feel like with
quite
Feast for it
nice.
always feels like you've got a kind of buffet of choices. It never feels really overwhelming. You can kind of choose which bit of the menu you want to look at. Well, I'm thinking I might want to, you know, go raiding. Where can I go in? Oh, these four actions along here. Well, how many workers do I want to commit? Or you can go the other way and be like, well, I've got two workers. What are my choices for the two workers? You can look at either kind of axis of the worker placement board, and
And it really chops down at the complexity level for you. It makes things gives you bite-sized decisions to make. So that's nice. He goes on to say that in regards to the randomness, he's perfectly happy with it, and he can't wait to explore the multitude of the cards. So he seemed to be a lot less critical of
no,
that
I mean,
than
I'm
I did.
getting turned around on it. Like what we were talking about this episode, I really am starting to realize that, especially for solo games, where it's not so the difficulty isn't player driven. The difficulty is your interaction with the board driven. If that makes sense. So randomness is, I think, a very good thing in solo games, or at least a very potentially not as problematic thing in solo games for me.
But he did also make a suggestion. He suggested that we use a variant if we're unhappy with it, where you choose your starting occupation rather than randomly determine it. Um, and there's still the same level of randomness when you pick up new occupation cards or roll the dice, but um, you actually get to choose your occupation card, which I thought would be interesting. Especially if you know you have a strategy you want to try out. I don't know if that's something that I would do. What do you
Yeah, that's a
think
really
about that?
good idea. I mean, what I tend to do when I play is I usually draw two occupation cards and pick one. I like to do it because there are some that I really don't like, and I think I'd have a bad time playing the game if I get landed with one that I don't like. And like I say, I always use the C. Like I said last episode, I always use the C deck because I tend to find that the starting occupations and the other occupations in the C decks are just nicer. They're more to my sort of play style. So I guess it's about finding which deck works best for you, or mixing them all up and giving yourself over to the gods of chaos.
Cool. Well, thanks for writing in, Eric. We also got a bit of a longer one from Joe on Facebook. And Joe said in response to our questions, he said that he's been playing solo games infrequently on and off for several years. And although he's not been drawn to it as much as multiplayer games, there are some games he prefers solo, such as Robinson Crusoe, is the example he gives, which is one that you've played solo, but I haven't. Um, Says it feels more. The reason he prefers it is because it feels more thematic with one survivor of a shipwreck. I don't know what you think
Oh
about
yeah, I
that.
totally get that with the Robinson Crusoe game. I played it like you say solo and with some friends, including you, Norm, and I found it a lot more immersive solo. You have two sort of support characters in there. Like when you're playing solo, I think you have Friday and a dog, and they kind of feel like your friends, and you kind of feel like you're going a little bit mad as you start attributing personality to them. Like if the dog does really well, you go, "Oh, he's a good dog. Oh, I like my dog," and you start feeling like you're getting wrapped up into that sort of world of isolation. That it's a perfect theme for a, and I guess that's why Friday does it too. It's a perfect theme for a solo board game where you're a lone survivor.
Well, if it starts making you talk to inanimate objects, I'm not sure I want to give it a go. Um, um, Joe goes on to say occasionally he'll play a solo game to learn the rules, which is a great way to learn the rules, as long as there aren't too many that are solo specific. So yeah, I guess if the game has to change a lot to be a solo game, one, I might not enjoy it either as an experience, and obviously it's not a good way to learn the rules. So yeah, that's fair enough. He goes on to say though that with the birth of his second son and his partner heading to bed a little bit earlier for night feeds, he's found that he's had more free time to at the end of each day. So he's starting to find it a little bit more appealing rather than looking at a screen to start unwinding with a solo
That's all.
game. Um, yeah, which is something I can absolutely get on board with, and yeah, I can imagine kids would do
Yeah,
that. Let's move on. He also says one advantage of playing solo, which he's never considered before, is making use of game expansions. So when he plays face to face, there's often a new player at the table, so the base game is preferred. But when he plays solo, he can explore the whole content of a board game that he's gone ahead and invested in. So that's pretty nice, I
yeah, I never
guess.
thought of that. That makes a lot of sense. Like I wouldn't have played with some of the expansion stuff for Mage Knight if it wasn't solo. I don't think.
Absolutely. And it reminded me of something. I remember us having a conversation about solo games and one of our friends who wasn't a solo gamer. There are lots of hidden like uh, pros to being a solo gamer, and I remember them saying, "I didn't even think about that." They just sold Pandemic Legacy Season One because they realized they weren't going to play it with a group. And I said, "Why didn't you just play it solo?" And they went, "I have no idea." um, but yeah, solo gaming, absolutely, Joe. You're
Yeah,
spot
yeah,
on.
right.
It's a
I
really
mean, I
good
think you
way to
also
make you.
you learn to appreciate the mechanics in a different way than when you're playing with players, especially if you play with the same gaming group and they always do the same sort of things. You can kind of anticipate what they're going to do. I know that my friends will often have the same strategy in certain games, and then when you move to playing the same game solo, and you're able to just have free reign and be like, well, maybe I'll try diving into the side of the game they usually play, or maybe I'll play something that you know yeah, it means you can interact with the mechanics in a totally different way. It gives you a lot more free reign, doesn't it?
Yeah, you don't have to worry about countering what they're doing. You can instead make your own
Yeah.
plans without having that interference. Now, obviously, sometimes that interference is what makes a game great, but it's also lovely to have both sides of the coin. And I feel like if you don't play solo games, you're not using your collection to its full potential. Um, he goes ahead and makes a recommendation as well. He says that I might get this name wrong. He says Alban Viard. It's spelled Viard. Is one of his favorite designers and tends to develop multiple modular expansions for each game he releases. He goes ahead and buys them all, and now he's finding that with solo gaming, he's getting to play them. Um, So he's made a few recommendations. One of them he recommended was Tramways, which is by that designer, which I've actually looked into and started reading the rules. So I'm going to hopefully give that a go on Tabletop Sim, maybe by next episode. Joe, I'll let you know exactly what I think about that. But he's looking into additional solo games now. After listening to the episode, he's looking at Feast for Odin and he's looking at things like Spirit Island as well. Um,
Oh, cracker! I like Spirit Island.
Yeah, I really should play Spirit Island because it's extremely well regarded as a solo game, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it's good. I mean, I don't think it does much that kind of really pushes the boat out for the point. It feels like a solo game. It feels like the mechanics tie in and work in the same sort of way. It gives me the same sort of sense of a lot of solo games. But it's interesting, and the theme's very nice. The tiles are very pretty. I'm looking forward to trying it again. It felt a little bit overwhelming having because I played it two hands and learning. So you have to learn a whole kind of mat of rules for your character that you choose, and then keep on a track of both of their hands. Maybe I was just not in the right mindset when I sat down to do it, but it felt quite overwhelming. I feel like it might play better two player, but I don't know.
Well, it's extremely well regarded as a solo game, but if there was one thing that would put me off of trying a game solo, it's that you have to play it multi-handed. It doesn't feel like true solo to me. There are some games where I'm perfectly fine doing it, like Pandemic, because the game is short. It's not very complex. Um, it's easy to plan synergies between two characters because that's what you do in a multiplayer game anyway. But when there's hidden information, or if the game is overly complex, like Spirit Island, hearing that you would have to, I
I don't
don't
know
know
if
if you
you have
do
to.
have to. I've
I
not
think
looked.
you can play with just one thing. I read around and heard that playing with two makes for a more interesting game. Maybe I'll try playing it with just one hand. Um, Let us know
Yeah.
how you guys play it.
Well,
Whether it's better with one or two, or
yeah, make a recommendation because people are probably spitting their drinks out their mouth when they hear that I'm the host of a solo gaming podcast. I haven't played Spirit Island, um, so please let me know what you prefer. Whether you prefer one, two, three, or four handed, and if it's anything other than one, I probably won't play it.
okay. Just want to say thank you very much for writing in. That was a really really awesome load of stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, cheers, Joe. Really appreciate that. So we also have another long one from Glyn. Now, Glyn reached out, and the first paragraph is so lovely. I'm going to read it word
Okay.
for word. He says, "Hi guys, I listened to the first episode last night, and it's good stuff. My overwhelming takeaway is that you have the two things I look for in podcasts: knowledge and likability."
Damn right.
Um, and and yeah, that it ends there. We don't need to read anything else, do we?
Brilliant. What perfect feedback. That's what we want to see. More of that.
Yeah, just more of that, please. But he does go on to give us some constructive feedback as well. But first of all, Glenn, that's really kind of you
Yeah.
to say, and it's also extremely gullible because our not our knowledge as solo gamers, like I said, was we're still at the start of our journey. But no, appreciate that a lot. Okay, yeah, he goes on to say a couple of things. Oh, yeah. So another nice one he says is that it's nice because we have a shared history in gaming. And he said our friendship came through the conversation, so that's really
Yeah.
nice. Awesome. But a couple of things he said. He said he found it a little bit difficult to follow what kind of a game of Feast for Odin was because we didn't sort of start by saying this is what a Feast for Odin is. We kind of kept dropping it into conversation, and he says we almost apologized and said, if you haven't played before, sorry, this is actually what the game is. And he said he as someone who hadn't played it before, felt like a bit of an afterthought. Which is fair. I think that's really fair criticism. What
Yeah,
do you think?
absolutely.
And I think, Glenn, we have tried to counter that. And I think at the start of this episode, we said exactly what kind of a game Friday was, the table presence, and the time it took to play. So hopefully, that's given you a really good idea. And another thing is also obviously Scruffy has done a full playthrough. So if what we described in our brief description isn't enough, you can just watch the full playthrough, and then they're released in tandem with the podcast. So that is something that that you can check out as well.
I mean,
Um,
you could even have that on muted in the background while you're listening to the podcast if you're got your screen up, and then you can see the game being played while listening to our lovely voices.
but yeah, and the email from Glyn was amazing. It was really long, so I'll cut it there. But he does go on to say about how he got into solo games, which is awesome. So he said he got into solo games. He said it's a bit weird to think about it now, but most of his experience has been watching playthroughs and reading rule books. So he lives in Vietnam, and every couple of years he has to keep his game shelf pretty tight and transportable. So when
Right,
he
right.
moves, so physical solo gaming has been limited. But his interest has grown because he's actually designing and developing a game. So he's developing a solo mode for a football game. Now, this is football as in what you Americans would call soccer if you're listening to it across the pond, but actual football. And he says the name, which is Fasisac, which is Fasisac. Again, apologies for the pronunciation. And he says, yeah, as he's developing the solo mode for that, it's actually got him a lot more interested in solo games. Um, he hasn't played enough to have a favorite, but he has tried out King Domino Solo, and he's also looking into Spirit Island and Baseball Highlights 2045. Have you heard of Baseball Highlights 2045?
I've not. No.
From what I know, it's a really well regarded solo experience. I can't remember the designer's name, but he used to be a host of Ludology, which is a podcast I really, really enjoy. So he has lots of good thoughts on games, so it might be something worth checking out for myself.
Definitely. I'll see if I can get a playthrough of that in, or just at least work out what it is before the next episode. That sounds awesome. Thank you for the tip.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Glenn. That's really, really appreciated. So that's it for the feedback that we got. Thank you, everyone who wrote in. We really, really, really appreciate it.
Really awesome feedback. Thank you, guys.
What are the questions that we're throwing out to the listeners this?
Yes. So the questions this week is there's just one question, which is: are there any solo games you think are too easy or too hard? Are there any solo games that you think are too easy or too hard?
Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward question, but we want to use it as a jumping off point. We want to carry on the discussion around difficulty in solo games because it does affect like we said, it affects the replayability, the likability, there's so much that the difficulty affects in solo gaming. We want to know what your experiences are. Is there something way up on the difficulty? We want to know what games are on what side of the scales. Which ones are too easy, which ones are too hard, and I'm really interested to see what people think. If you had to guess, Scruffy, what would you say? What would you say is a solo game that's too difficult?
I think some people might say Friday. That's why we picked Friday for this list. But
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I look forward to hearing what people say. I don't want to try and predict it.
Okay, that's absolutely fair, and I think Friday would be.
Oh, I know one. I know one.
Yeah.
This War of Mine. I've played it twice now, and both times just died almost immediately from nonsense. That game is too hard, but it's fun. I mean, I think the whole point of that game is you're meant to lose. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I think you're meant to just have a miserable time. That's the theme. That's the game. This War of Mine. That's my top pick.
I think that can be a topic for a future episode. Games that aren't meant to be fun, games that are meant to be to make you think. And I think this War of Mine would be a really good candidate for something like that because from what you tell me about the game, it definitely sounds like it's there to just make you feel bad.
That's it. So don't forget to check out my YouTube channel. Links are in the description. It's Scruffy Gamer. If you just type that into YouTube, I don't know, maybe I'll pop up. But otherwise, the links are in the description. It's a full playthrough of Friday. Just to reiterate, the question this episode is that are there any solo games you think are too easy or too hard? And we have links to how to contact us in the description.
Yep, so it's alwaysplayer1podcast@gmail.com. You can also contact us through Facebook and through Instagram. Links are in the description. On Instagram, we are at alwaysplayer1podcast. So we should be really easy for you to find on there. But that's pretty much everything for this episode, guys. So thanks very much for listening. I'm Norm.
And I'm Scruffy Gamer.
Thank you for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Always Player One. Until then, reach out on Facebook, Instagram, or by email to keep the conversation going.